Well, Glenn, thanks so much for being on the show today. Really excited to dive into your really fascinating story. I want to start here, though, and we kind of go in from there. How does somebody in their 60s, after they finished a successful career and built a well-known company, which we're going to get into, become a professional dishwasher at a local bakery?
Well, there's a story there, of course, as there always is. So when during my working career as a civil engineer, I typically got up at 3:30 in the morning, did my Bible study devotionals, was at my desk at 5 o'clock in the morning, and didn't get home till 6. I tried to get home by 6 for dinner, unless there was a night meeting, which 1 or 2 times a week there probably was. So when I retired, we moved to Bend, Oregon, and there's this local bakery. And so I would walk over there Monday morning with my Wall Street Journal and my Ember mug and have a cup of coffee and just enjoy squandering like a couple hours celebrating that I didn't have to be at my desk. And, spending time there, you get to know the people that work there. And I noticed, they seem to be having a good time. That's not true of every place where you frequent. It was obvious they had, from kind of overhearing conversations, that some of them had relationships. They were in bands and things like that, or went rock climbing together outside of work. And they always backed each other up. It just seemed like a cool place to work. And so one day as I'm leaving, there's a notice on the door that says, "Hey, attention high schoolers, we're looking for a part-time dishwasher." And I didn't think anything of it, because obviously I'm not a high schooler, and I just finished working. I'm not really looking to start working again. But week after week, I noticed the notice was still there. So finally I asked them, I go, "Hey, don't you guys need to take that notice down? I mean, how hard can it be to find a part-time dishwasher, right?" And they said, no, we've got some time. We're waiting for the right person. And then I thought, I don't know, I was kicking around in my brain, the right person. Ooh, maybe that's me. Maybe that's why they haven't found someone. Maybe God has my name on this for some reason. So next time I was in, I said, "Yeah, I'd like an application for that part-time dishwasher job." And they said, "Oh yeah, sure, Glenn. For who?" Thinking like I got a kid or grandkid or nephew or something. I go, "Oh, for me." And there was like a beat of silence, and they kind of shrugged and said, "Well, okay. Here's the application. Just submit it with a copy of your resume." And I thought, copy of my resume for like part-time dishwashing position? I thought, well, that's interesting. So I thought about my resume, and I, professional registered engineer. I've got an MBA, graduated top of my class in engineering, started multiple companies. I said, my resume is a little light on the professional dishwashing experience. And they said, "Glenn, don't worry about it. We like to teach people to do things our way here." It's like, well, that's great, because I have no bad dishwashing habits to unlearn. So I turned in my application with my resume, and under interests, under career objective, I put part-time dishwasher, and under interests, in addition to running ultra marathons and backpacking and stuff like that, I put ocean rolls, which is their kind of their signature pastry. And then I wrote a cover letter because I don't know, that's what you do, and I explained in the cover letter, look, I don't want to take a job away from someone that needs one, because I don't. But having run business myself, it seems like it could be useful to have someone that knows how to do the job, but doesn't need the hours. So, you can use them to fill in. You don't need to stress on like, do they have enough hours to pay their rent? Because it's not going to make a difference to me. So I turned it in, and a while went by, and I hadn't heard anything. So I sent an email in. Good follow through. If you've been in business, it's like, "Hey, just wanted to check, make sure you got the application, see if you had any other questions, is there other information I can provide?" And so I get an email back going, "Oh, nice follow through," because they're used to dealing with high schoolers. Right. And they set the date for the interview. So it's like January, February sometime. So I dress up. I mean, I haven't been for a lot of interviews in my life, but you make your best first impression. So I put on my custom suit. I got like custom cufflinks, pocket square, my wingtips, and head on over there through the snow. And so I show up, and Weston's pulling shots at the espresso machine. He says, "Hey, Glenn, you look a little different than you usually do when you show up here." I go, "Yeah, I'm here for my interview." And he said, "Okay, well, have a seat. I'll tell Whit that you're here." And so she finally came out from doing pastry stuff, and I explained what I'd said in my cover letter, and I explained my address, saying, "Look, I know I'm not going to wash dishes like this, but the reason I applied is that it's obvious to me that you've created something special here, that people like to work here, and in my experience, that usually flows from the top, from the owners." And so when I found that I was going to be interviewing with one of the owners instead of like the manager, I want to show proper respect for what you've created. So they told me sometime afterwards that they get applications from, without being ageist, people of my age from time to time, and they never accept them because people of my age tend to want to play. Think it'd be fun to work at a bakery, and they go, we're a production here. It's like you got to slam the stuff out and move. He says, "You seem different. We took a chance on you." So anyway, I got the job.
That's fascinating. Again, didn't need it, new to the area, so I know you used that as a way to meet with people. Now, you mentioned, and I kind of want to get into this, obviously you're an engineer, and I'll talk about that a little bit as well, but you also mentioned, backpacking, marathon, outdoor things, all that sort of thing. Can you share a little bit of how you got into hiking? And maybe this is two questions. Obviously, it led into eventually founding Gossamer Gear, but how did backpacking, hiking, all that become a passion of yours?
When I was a kid, we used to go camping, just like car camping in the national parks. My dad had an old pickup, and we'd have the old Coleman stove and, Coleman lantern and stuff. And I just fell in love with, that smell of the sun on the pine needles and the big trees and the, blue jays and squirrels chirping. And I don't know, I like being outside. And I was lucky enough to grow up in the 60s, before kids had activities managed and there was no internet. And, we were just free range kids. It was like, get home from school and boom, hop on the bikes and you were gone. And as long as you were home, before the streetlights came on, it's like, you were good. My parents had no idea where we were. So I always liked being outside. And then when I graduated high school in 1976, for some reason, I'm not really sure why, I was active in the outing club in high school, and we did some bicycle trips in the outing club, and then also I was in Boy Scouts, and so we didn't do a lot of backpacking, but we did spend time outside in the woods. So when I graduated high school, somehow I got the idea that it would be great to ride my bicycle across the country, and three of my friends thought it would be a good idea too. So we set out, and there's no internet to plan stuff, so we just took a map of the United States, and I took a blue highlighter and just did a line across the map, and then we'd get into a new state and look at like which kind of state highways kind of generally went where we were headed.
And you guys are going from where to where?
We're going from Amherst, Massachusetts to San Francisco, California. 4,200 miles.
That's wild. Now, I do want to ask about this since you brought it up. You wrote a book called Take Less, Do More, which we'll get into, a really great book. And you talk about this story in there. At some point in the story, you were kind of, I guess, one of your friends, well, I'll let you pick up on it, was getting picked on, whatever, and you guys split up and you finished the journey separate. Can you kind of share what happened there and how that went down?
Yeah. So there was friction, and like most friction, there's many sources. One was one of the guys could sleep no matter what. He would often just stretch out on top of a picnic table and drop to sleep. And I think, and someone snored. I don't know if it was him. And so someone else wasn't sleeping well, and the snoring was exacerbating that. And so they were irritated. Obviously, if you don't get enough sleep, everything starts to go downhill, and especially if you're like cycling 80 miles a day. But another factor was a character flaw of mine, which I tend to be very task driven. And so for some reason I thought, we needed to be on the road, do 80 miles a day, which there was really no good reason for. I mean, we had all summer. It's not like I didn't have a job or I wasn't starting college or anything. We didn't have a
Yeah.
deadline. And some of the other guys were like, hey, this is kind of a cool place. Why don't we only do 40 miles today and hang out here for the afternoon? And I was like, no, we got to do the miles. So, there were a couple of reasons why we split up into two groups. But we are actually, thanks to the magic of the internet, all four in touch again.
Oh, wow.
And we're talking about doing a complete the loop trip going from San Francisco back to Amherst, Massachusetts in
Oh, wow.
2026.
Yeah. That's incredible. And you guys made it. How long did it take you to go cross country?
It was like 7-8 weeks. Yeah.
Okay. 7-8 weeks. And so you did that. I know we're kind of maybe fast forward a little bit here. And so how do you go from that to kind of, I guess you started taking on hiking, backpacking in bigger spurts, bigger journeys. How did that develop over time?
Well, it was actually, so our oldest son, Brian, when he went into Boy Scouts, we joined a local troop down in the San Diego area. And the Scoutmaster was a friend of mine I knew from Toastmasters and from business. And it was a super active troop. Did, like a Colorado River trip, bunch of backpacking trips, a couple of summer camps. It was a big troop, like 80, 100 kids. And so we got into backpacking. We had a number of training trips, and then the peak trip for the troop was a week in the high Sierras, hiking along the Pacific Crest Trail or some route in the Sierras. And so that got me back into backpacking. And about the same time, my buddy, the Scoutmaster, Reed Miller, who I actually dedicated the book to, he read Ray Jardine's book, The Pacific Crest Trail Hiker's Handbook. And in that book, Ray Jardine talks about ultralight backpacking and how he got his kit down to his base pack weight down to 8 pounds. And I remember just, the first Sierra trek we did, I went down to local REI and said, hey, we're going to be a week in the Sierra. What do we need? Because I didn't have any of the stuff from my youth. And they loaded us up with, all the stuff. And with a week's worth of food and water, the pack weighed over 70 pounds.
Wow.
Leaving the trailhead.
Yeah.
So compare that, like if I was doing that today, probably like 20 pounds.
Wow. Yeah. So, let's talk about, I guess, eventually, I'll ask this question first, and maybe we can talk about Gossamer gear in there. When I was reading your book, you were talking about how you ultimately developed an ultra lightweight backpack, to kind of fit your own problem. But then you kind of would put the plans on the internet, and the internet was in its infancy kind of when you started, but even since then, so that people could also like learn what you did and replicate it for themselves. And I kept wondering, like, were you ever worried that someone might take your plans and start not just like making them for their own, which is what you offer them for, but like selling them for your own, like selling them on their own and like starting a company? Like, here are my plans, since you're like offering them online. Was that ever a concern for you?
Something like that actually happened. And variations of it have happened a couple times. But I guess to me, I thought, which obviously I misjudged, I figured the market was so small, it wasn't worth pursuing. I mean, so I don't know. I didn't worry about it. I mean, if someone could make a couple of bucks off it, great. And I look at it now. I mean, I still have one of those old G4 packs, and it's a pretty crude design. But it worked.
Yeah. So you're doing all that, and can you just talk about how that kind of led you into Gossamer gear and all that?
Yeah. So, I sewed my own gear. Even in 1976, I sewed like a tarp and some things for myself. Because my mom thought every kid should leave home knowing how to cook, bake, and sew. And so, sewing's a great skill. And I use it today. You need a little something. It's like kind of like before 3D printers. It's kind of like the magic hack. I was like, well, I'll just get some material and sew something. It's great. So, when my buddy Reed read this book, and I thought, well, the pack that they sold me at REI for that first Sierra trek weighed 7.5 pounds empty. And so I thought, well, that's probably a good place to start. So I sewed a pack that weighed like 13 ounces instead of 7.5 pounds. So I thought, this is great. And then, sewed another one, because the good news and bad news of being an engineer is you're always thinking about how to make things better. You're never satisfied. So, the fourth one I put on the internet, and then I would get emails from people. I put the plans on for free, and I'd get emails from people like, well, I don't know how to sew. Could you make one for me? I'll pay you. And it's like, well, it takes me like 10 hours to, you got to mark out all the fabric. It was very crude, cut it out, sew it up. So I tried having my wife make one, and that was frustrating for both of us because it wasn't a real pattern. It was just like my notes, and it wasn't written like a real sewer would understand it. But, we had her make some, we had some ladies on the street make a couple, but, basically I tell people, no, I'm working 80 hours a week as an engineer. I don't have time to make you a pack. Doesn't matter what you pay me. Right. But I got enough inquiries. I thought, well, I feel bad for these people. I should figure out a way to get a few of them made. I figured if I could get 25 made, that would be enough for all these people that were calling me, and they'd stop bugging me. So the people I got the fabric from, Quest Outfitters, a couple of sisters in Florida that I'm still in contact with, still order stuff from for projects. They said, well, there's this guy on the West Coast that, is cut and sew operation. So I talked to Monty, and he says, our minimum order is 100. It's like, oof, I only need 25. We go back and forth and finally settle on 50. And I thought, they'll be in the garage for the next 5 or 10 years, but I'll eventually get rid of them. And so our son, Brian, a teenager at the time, put up a rudimentary website where people could fill out a form, and it would send me an email with the details, the order. And so we ordered the 50 packs, and one day I'm sitting at my desk, I get an email. I go, oh, someone made an order. Uh-oh. So I didn't have any systems in place, because if you're only going to sell 25 packs, you don't worry about like systems and names and like, all that kind of stuff. So I grabbed a pad of yellow paper and wrote down the order, and I still have that pad of yellow paper with those early orders. And then before I even took delivery of the 50 packs, I had 86 orders. Oh, so that was my first indication, like, okay, I might have underestimated this slightly. So it kind of exploded from there.
Now, and I'm curious too, I want to talk about hiking and backpacking, but talking about Gossamer gear, obviously it got bigger, making a lot of sales, you hired employees, that sort of thing. In your book, you shared how you were about to shut down the business because you didn't have time to run it with your full-time job, other responsibilities. And that story is really cool, kind of what saved it. We can talk about that in a second. But as I was reading this, I was curious, like, did you ever consider leaving your engineering job to just do Gossamer gear? And obviously you didn't go that route. So like, why were you considering shutting this down and staying as an engineer as opposed to maybe doing Gossamer gear instead?
Well, if I was single, I might have made a different decision. But I'm married. I got a wife, kid. I got a mortgage. I got kids for college education. My middle son's severely disabled. The wife is suffering, as you might expect, from that trauma. So, I realized that while there were many benefits from the gear business, personal satisfaction, the people I met, none of those accrued to the rest of my family. And my first responsibility was to them. So, I'm making good money as an engineer. I'm making zero money selling backpacks. Like, okay, I mean, I got to make the call for the family.
Yeah. And since we're on the subject, can you just share like in the last minute, how that business was kind of rescued? I mean, you were making a decision to shut this thing down, and then what happened?
Yeah. And it's always tough because people ask, like, they want me advice. Like, hey, it's worked out great for you. You got this company that's worth millions of dollars and yada, yada, yada. And it's like, I'm not sure that works for anyone else. I mean, it's like great if it does, but and there are a couple things you could probably do to increase, I was always focused on serving. And so, how can I give back? I was on the board of the Pacific Crest Trail Association. And through that, actually, I became aware of John Mackey, co-founder of Whole Foods Market, because he was a client of another of Henry Shire's Tarp Tent. And so we're at some board meeting and talking about board members, and he goes, hey, what about John Mackey? And I said, who's John Mackey? He says, co-founder of Whole Foods Market. And I go, oh, sorry, I don't shop at Whole Foods Market, which over the years has been a bone of contention between John and I. But so we went to Boulder to pitch him on becoming a board member, which he declined because he very wisely guards his time jealously. That's so he can, at the time was running a multi-billion-dollar business and still taking 6 weeks off to go hiking. But he did make a very large contribution, and it was because of my service to the board and the fact that I had kind of a little bit of a reputation, through Gossamer gear of light gear, and also getting my personal backpack weight down, that John was interested in meeting me. So when I had to follow up with him a couple weeks later on the board position, in the background at the same time, it's like, okay, I'm working all these hours. I'm working like 70 hours a week in the engineering, another 30 on the gear business. Like one of them has to go, and it's probably going to be the one that I'm not making any money at. So I told him, as I followed up, I go, oh, by the way, I'm going to close down Gossamer gear. So, if you want anything, order it in the next week or two. And that's when he said, John's he's an amazing businessman and very quick. Like, he will analyze things and just say, okay, here's the deal. Here's what we're going to do, or here's the offer. And so he said, don't do anything. I'm going on a walk. I'll call you back. And he called me back a day or two later, says, hey, I got a proposal for you. I think Gossamer gear makes amazing designs. I think the gear needs to survive. I'll pay you $100,000 for 75% of the company. I'll put more money in. I'll hire someone. I've got someone in mind to run it, and you could be as involved or uninvolved as you want. He wanted me to retain some ownership so that I was still involved in the company, still creating new designs. And so, that's how the company was saved. Otherwise, it'd just be a footnote in history. Yeah.
And it's still going to this day. Now, I want to talk about backpacking, hiking, and you do a lot of like long distance, multiple days. For the many people who have not experienced something like that, I did in high school. I did a 3-day. I don't know if you could say backpack, a little bit, camping, in the mountains, whatever. But for a lot of us haven't experienced it. How would you try to explain what a long, maybe a week long or 5 days trip is like for those people who have no real reference for that?
Well, I don't feel like I'm a huge hiker because I know so many people who are huge hikers. They've hiked 20,000 miles and they're gone for months at a time. And I've done some longer trips. The vast majority of my trips are probably 3 to 5 days. That's kind of a sweet spot, no resupply needed. And you're, it's easier to plan, easier to execute. A longer trip is typically just a number of shorter trips because you can only carry food for so long. Right. Gets pretty heavy over 4 to 5 days. And you may have to do 7 or something, but so you have to plan resupplies. And so you're either getting off the trail or, caching food, or the trail goes through someplace where you can resupply. So it's just a series of, a longer trip is just a series of shorter trips kind of end to end. And you've got some logistics of shuttle at the beginning, but you have some advantages. Typically it takes about 3 days to get used to kind of the rhythm of life in the woods, away from all your luxuries, and also to get some of the benefits, like your brain stops thinking about your to-do list, and right. It's 3 days without cell phone coverage. And so, if you only do 3 or 4 day trips, you kind of, you don't get the full advantage because just by the time you get into the rhythm, it's trip's over. So on a longer trip, your body toughens up. The third day is usually the hardest, until your body you start to get stronger. So longer trip is, many benefits, but basically just shorter trips strung together.
Now you also have taken, you have led a lot of trips. You have like a yearly trip or two that you take people on. I think maybe you want to speak to some of those. I guess some of the guys that go on your I'm thinking about the one that like Matthew McConaughey went on. I forget which trail that is. That you kind of take a group of guys every year. Mm-hmm. For you, is it kind of like I know, I'm taking people on a trip that maybe they haven't been on before. Do you ever get kind of like lose your, I mean, for them, it's probably like, this is the first time they've experienced something like this. You've experienced it a lot. So it's like, oh, I know how they're going to react. I know how to do this. Or is it just a lot of fun for you to like give people new experiences? What's it like for you to kind of lead a repeated trip with a bunch of newer people every year?
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, I see new things every year, but at this point, I've probably done Buckskin Gulch, I don't know, a dozen times or more. Although, every trip is different. I mean, sometimes you're wading up to your armpits or you have to swim in frigid water. And then sometimes it's completely dry and you're like tired of, trudging across sand. And the winter floods changed the canyon. What worked last year doesn't work this year. You got to go further around or figure out how you get through the rock fall, when things are blocked or there's mud in places that there wasn't last year. So it always changes. But yeah, a lot of the fun is, people's reaction to things that they've never experienced and being able to, show them like, well, if you, the hidden petroglyphs, like if you hike up on this little incline rock, then you can see the petroglyph up there, which otherwise, if you're just walking down the canyon, you don't. We had actually took a young pastor friend of mine on one trip, and it was so much fun because he was so excited. He's like, all the firsts of the trip is like first time in a slot canyon, first time cowboy camping without a shelter, first time drinking water fresh out of a spring without treating it. So that's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Now I'm curious, you've probably had a number of close calls or at least witnessed them. What is one of the scariest injury or potential life or death moments you've had while backpacking and hiking?
Yeah, that's interesting. There are ones that my wife doesn't hear about till years afterwards, because I know it would make her nervous. And we had a saying in Scouts, that you're never more than 3 bad decisions away from not coming back, because bad decisions in the backcountry have a way of compounding themselves. But scariest times, one was running out of water on the Pacific Crest Trail. I was hiking with my buddy Reed, and we had crossed Whitewater Canyon, and there was a bunch of water flowing. We had to like hop rocks to get across it. And so we should have filled up, but we still had like, a half liter, and water's heavy. And so we thought, well, it looks like the trail kind of parallels this river. So it's like, why fill up now when we're crossing it? Because we're never that far away from it. We'll just fill up when we're out of water. So we hike along, use up the last of our water, and we walk over to the edge of the river because the trail kind of paralleled it, but it wasn't visible. Walked over to the edge and looked down. It was bone dry. This is desert area, so the water comes and goes in the riverbed. So I was like, there's no water here. There might be water if we continue, but we don't know that. The only place we know there's water is like 45 minutes back that we crossed. And so we drew straws, and Reed might have cheated. I think I was in better and worse off shape, and he probably recognized that. There was no shade. I found like a little bush that I could put my head in the shade and just lay down. And he took all our water containers, hiked all the way back, filled them up, hiked all the way back to us. But by then I was so dehydrated that, we treated and drank the water, but stumbled on. I was just not feeling well. And when we finally got up to where we crossed over and there were some trees, you're getting up higher in elevation, and there's like a little campsite there in the shade. I was shivering uncontrollably, even though it was like 80 degrees out. And so I hopped in my sleeping bag and went to sleep, and then felt better when I woke up. But that was, kind of on the edge there.
Yeah. Now, speaking of like scary moments and near death opportunities, experiences, your biggest one was not hiking, but it was you actually survived a plane crash. So can you talk about like what that was like for you and how that experience has shaped you?
Yeah, we were flying back from a leadership seminar in Northern California, and one of the guys had his pilot's license, and And so we thought, this will be great. You know, we can play like the Hot Shot Jet Setters, and we're in a small plane, and this is awesome. So we were flying down. We stopped in San Francisco for a nice dinner and just really enjoying the trip. Gets dark, and I'm thinking the winds aloft were not what he expected. Anyway, we end up running out of gas at night in Orange County over a populated area. And so, the pilot puts the plane in glide, trying to get to the nearest airfield, trying to find it in the dark because it was a small private field. The lights were turned off. Ended up narrowly missing a couple houses and crashing through some trees that took the wings off. So we landed hard, and it blew the doors off the impact. And I was the first one to come to and said, "Is everyone okay? Is everyone okay?" And I didn't hear anything. So at that point, I thought I was the sole survivor of this crash. Turns out the pilot was the only one who actually died. And he'd been married 6 months. So I guess the way it changed me is, I thought about him leaving on the trip and hoping he'd left his young wife on good terms. And, I realized he expected to come back. And after that, whenever I leave my wife, I don't take for granted that I'm coming back. I assume it, and it's, it's further away now. But it was really clear that first couple of days, like I will not leave my wife without telling her I love her, because for all I know, this could be the last words, so.
Yeah. Did you struggle with any, nightmares after the fact, or any survivor's guilt of he didn't make it, we made it? What was that, for you?
No, I didn't have any survivor's guilt. I did have periodic dreams for years afterwards of having to land a plane on a freeway and getting caught in high tension wires. And I don't know why. I mean, I had my pilot's license, but we didn't land on a freeway. It had nothing to do with our actual crash. But I haven't had that in probably a decade. But I did have some dreams like that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm curious too. You continue to hike and backpack and lead trips. You've done this for decades now. You've probably seen tons of places. Why do you continue to do it?
I just love being outside. I mean, we've recently started, we bought, it was my wife's idea, but, it turned out way better than I thought. We've got a Winnebago Revel. It's a Sprinter van, outfitted. So we can do adventures that don't involve sleeping in the dirt.
Nice.
And you get to take a shower. And now I still prefer sleeping in the dirt and not taking showers, but also like being with my wife. So, that allows us to have adventures that get us out into the woods, but without having to sleep in the dirt.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I just still enjoy being outside. There's just, part of it is the challenge of, developing your rhythms and meeting the challenges that come up, because, wilderness, obviously you do your research, you plan as well as you can for the expected temperatures and conditions, but things happen, the weather turns and you have to solve problems, or a bridge is out and you got to figure out a way to get across a river or things like that. So, it keeps me engaged and active and challenged.
Yeah. So I do want to talk about the sleep thing. As we're recording this, a couple weeks ago, I went camping with a couple friends. I didn't sleep at all. We have a tent. I had the blow up mattress. I had everything. I'm like, this is awful. And I'm like, if I could skip the night part, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., this is great. And I'm reading your book, Take Less, Do More. And I've got some friends that are really big into hiking. And I'm like, how do you sleep? Now you talk about some little thing that you use but even especially at your age here, and you say I love sleeping outside. What's that actually like? Especially, maybe this might be helpful. I mean, when you take trips for people who maybe aren't as used to this, how do you actually get to sleep when you're doing all these things and you're outside?
So I'm 66. I'm not super old. And so far, I prefer not to use an air mattress. So part of it is I'm kind of with you in the, like, to me, sleep is just what you need to do when it's too dark to hike. Although I've done plenty of miles by headlamp, if I'm not tired, but, part of it is the way I do wilderness is I tend not to sit well. So I'm not like sitting by a lake. I'm walking 20, 30 miles a day. So that makes it a little easier to sleep because you're whooped. And it is always, that's the other disadvantage of kind of, shorter trips is it always takes a night or two to kind of just, calm down and get used to, your brain gets going and the different noises or lack of noises or whatever it is. So, you didn't have that advantage. Like if it's 1 to 2 nights, it's just a different environment, different noises, different temperatures and sleeping systems. So it's always a little different. And, I always caution, like sleeping is my superpower. So what works for me may not work for everyone.
Yeah. And you make it work. Now you mentioned your sons, your kids as well a little bit. Can you share a little bit about Derek? Talk about his disability and how he has impacted your life.
Yeah. So our middle son, Derek, was born severely disabled, hydrocephalus, had to be by C-section because his head had swelled. And so he had no brain inside his skull, basically, if you looked at a scan of it, X-ray or CT scan. And, he still had basic functions because much of that, which was a shock to me, is controlled by your brain stem, your breathing and swallowing and things like that. He couldn't eat solid food, had a strong gag reflex, had to be fed by bottle, and often would throw it all up just after you'd finished feeding him. So obviously huge impact on the family. And as a engineer, I'm used to solving problems. It's like, okay, what are the parameters? What are the resources? Let's solve it. And, Derek was a problem I couldn't solve. That was a problem that drove me to my knees in prayer because it's like, okay, I'm not going to be able to do this on my own. How do I support my wife and hold the family together and, hold the business together? The business was having tough times. It's like, that was a dark time of life for sure.
Yeah. And what are the lessons? He ended up passing away at what age, and how have you continued his legacy since then?
He passed away before his 20th birthday. And I think some of the benefits of the family is, our other two sons got, I think, a little shorter thrift because so much energy and time had to go into Derek, which I think can be they're healthy, happy, successful young men. I think it's not always a bad thing to not be the center of attention and the world not revolve around you as a kid. It's like, hey, figure out your place in the greater scheme of life and plug in and figure it out. It's not like the world is your oyster that conforms to your desires and your needs. So I think that was helpful. And the other thing is they don't have, the fear of people who are different. They grew up with Derek, who was confined to a wheelchair, couldn't talk, couldn't walk, obviously. And so they're not put off by different people, I think, and are much more accepting than most. Yeah. And, for Francie and I, since we survived it, it's given us a basis to go by. We just had people over last night, and we talked about lending our Sprinter van out to friends, and they were like, wow, I'm not sure that's hard to do. And it's like, yeah, when you had a disabled child and had a child die, it's like, we've been through hard stuff. It's like we're building a house here and people go, oh, building a house is hard, like high rate of divorce and things like that. And it's like, yeah, no, it's what we've been through, business failure and working a year without money and death of a child and disabled kids. Like, no, this does not even move the needle for us. So it just gives you a different perspective, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Now you mentioned, it's funny. You mentioned kind of share your faith journey kind of later on towards the book. Sounds like a lot of it started with Derek trying to figure this thing out. And as I was reading your book, before I got to that part, as a pastor myself, Christian, it's like sometimes you just like know or could tell. I'm like, man, this guy, I feel he sounds like a Christian to me, but he hasn't said anything about it. I'm like, I don't know. And then we started getting into it. I'm like, oh, I was completely not surprised. And so you mentioned how obviously that's a big part of your faith journey, but in the book you talk about a gopher. So can you share the story about how the gopher led to your faith becoming real to you?
Yeah, my gopher conversion. So it started with Derek, thinking like, okay, there's got to be something more than me because I'm not going to be able to solve this problem. So we started. Francie grew up Catholic, so God and faith was always just part of life for her. It was easy, and she sent me out to check out different churches, and we started going to our neighbor's church. Their kids were the same age as our boys, and so they played a lot together and were always over at each other's houses. And so we started going to their church, a little small 4-square church in Encinitas. And, I'm hearing the messages. It's like, okay, kind of makes sense to me. I get the whole eternal salvation thing. But, then I had this gopher problem. And gopher hole popped up in our backyard, in our back lawn. And the first one you're trying to ignore, it's like, that's not really a gopher thing, and then there's another one, then there's 3. It's like, oh my gosh, it's like, this guy's going to destroy my yard here. So I tried smoke bombs. Of course, I'm a guy. You go for fire or smoke or something. There's got to be a good way to solve this, right? Explosives. That didn't work. I still new holes are popping up. So I thought, okay, we're going old school. Took a hose, kind of excavated one of the holes and put the hose in there and turned it on a little bit. And then, the water's just pouring in. I've turned it up more. Finally, the hose is going full blast, pouring into this hole. There's no sign of any water coming out anywhere. I'm thinking oh my gosh, is there like a gopher New York City under there? It's like, how much space is there? So I, the lowest gopher hole was out in the front near our garage. And I thought, well, I'm a civil engineer. Water flows downhill. It's like the water's got to come out here, right? If they're all connected. So I grabbed a shovel and went to wait by the hole. And I prayed. And I don't know why I thought to me pray, because this gopher was like another problem I couldn't solve. It was driving me crazy. And so I prayed and I said, God, I get whole eternal salvation. That sounds like a pretty good deal to me. But I said, are you here on the day-to-day stuff? It's like, with any luck, death's a long time off. It's like, I got many years before then. Are you any help on the day-to-day stuff? Like this darn gopher. And right after I prayed that prayer, there was like a sputter, and a gopher sputtered up in the hole, and I whacked him with the shovel. And then I turned off the water and then walked around the corner to our friend's house and said, what must I do to be saved? Will you pray for me?
Wow, that's incredible. And now you guys have been connected and made a difference since then. Now, when you're reading your book, I was like, I have to, this is like a side note, random thing. I was like, I got to know. You mentioned how at some point you had a friend who flicked their snoring friend's Adam's apple twice to make them stop snoring. They're like, I could fix this, I guess, on one of your hikes. You made it seem like that actually worked. And does that actually work?
Well, you'd probably have to talk to either Matthew McConaughey, who was the flicker, or Ali Salim, who was the guy who got flicked. I don't know. I wasn't, okay. Like I said, sleeping is my superpower, so the snoring probably wasn't too loud because I don't remember it. I was probably sleeping.
Okay.
But I don't know. Matthew McConaughey's a pretty talented guy, so if he says that's the way to solve snoring, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt.
All right, I guess I'll continue my search then.
Yeah.
He sounded confident in the book that it was going to work. He sounded confident.
Which is, confidence is 90% of it sometimes, right?
Now, I probably have to ask this because I'm sure people always want to know this. We've mentioned Matthew McConaughey a couple of times. So can you just kind of explain how that came about? How he kind of went hiking with you, and really kind of how you do this every year with a different group of guys?
Yeah, so Matthew McConaughey, to be clear, in spite of his generous endorsement in my book, is not a friend of mine. He's a friend of a friend. So, and it all starts with John Mackey, actually, the guy who saved Gossamer gear. John, and actually my list is an idea based on, John likes to go on a lot of trips, and he likes to do trips with friends. Good company, new places, and he's got fun friends, super interesting from a wide variety. I've hiked on the Appalachian Trail with him, with everyone who it's like could be someone who has 3 PhDs, someone who's a billionaire and owns multiple islands, and someone who graduated high school, and barely. And he doesn't care. He's, are they good company on the trail, and can they carry their own stuff? And so on one of John's trips, because his friends are so interesting, I met Dan Buettner, who wrote the Blue Zones, multiple Blue Zones books. If you looked up like world's most interesting guy, I mean, he's got stories, just unbelievable stories. So I invited Dan on my Buckskin Gulch trip, and he says, "Oh yeah, that'd be great." And then Dan's sometimes not the most organized guy, so he called me back, like a couple days later, like, "Hey, can I invite a couple other people?" "Yeah, sure, Dan." Then a week later, like, "Oh, I got another couple friends." I go, "Dan, why don't we just make this trip like your friends, okay?" Because then you can invite up to 7 of them, and we'll make it work. So he invited Matthew McConaughey because Matthew's one of his friends. So,
yeah, and they went on there from there. I'd probably ask this way for people who listen to this. Maybe they're novices. When I was reading the book too, there's like, oh, this sounds interesting, this sounds fun, but it seems kind of intimidating to start, like hiking, backpacking, all the gear. For someone who's like maybe interested in like trying this out or kind of going into that world, how does somebody get started? Doing kind of some of the things you've been doing.
Yeah, and I appreciate you asking that question because it is intimidating, and I face that with like different things. That that looks interesting, but it's like when you don't know anything, it's like where do you even start?
Yeah.
And there are, if you have show notes, there's a couple people I know. I'm not a good resource because I've been doing it so long that I don't remember what it was like 30 years ago when I didn't know anything. And so it's hard for me to tell people where you start.
Right.
But I have talented friends who are very good at that. They're gifted teachers. They know the extreme stuff, but they also can take someone who's never done it before and okay, here's the simple stuff. These are the 3 things you need to know today for this trip. Start small, and then you can build on that. The most important thing is to get out. I mean, oftentimes there's meetup groups in your area or something like that, and those often have more experienced people, but also have beginner trips that you can just go on an overnight. I do some work here locally, Women Who Explore, which it can be especially intimidating for women to go backpacking. And so, they have a variety of different, they'll start with a basic, okay, we're going to go to a campground, but we're going to do a hike. So you'll have all your gear, we'll get to set up the tents, you get to experience sleeping bag and everything, but it's in kind of a semi-safe environment. And then you can, build up to okay, now we're going to do an overnight. And then, okay, now we're doing a week-long trip in the Sierras.
Yeah. Now, we mentioned Take Less, Do More, the book, kind of the stories from it. What led you to actually write this book?
Well, that actually gets back to John Mackey again. He's a big gear guy, loves to talk gear. And so often on his hikes, we'd be walking along, talking gear and techniques. And he'd say, Glenn, you need to write a book about ultralight backpacking. And I would say, this probably started 10, 12 years ago. And I'd say, well, John, I think there's plenty of great books out there on ultralight backpacking. I don't really think I need to add my 2 cents to it. But among his other attributes, John's very persistent. And so, the discussions kept coming up. And then pretty soon he's talking to his friends. And so I'd be hiking with one of his friends on a hike, and they say, hey, John tells me you're writing a book. It's like, oh my gosh. But John's offer was, he said, hey, you should write a book. I'll write the foreword. And then I thought, well, there's probably not too many people having someone as high-powered as John Mackey offering to write the foreword to their book. So I thought I probably ought to take advantage of that, before he forgets or changes his mind. So finally I decided, okay, I got to write this book.
Yeah. I got to say, this is what I was going to say before we started recording. When I got the book sent to me for this interview, I was like, sweet, yeah, this is good. I'll kind of like leaf through it, kind of do things. As someone who reads a lot, likes to read a lot. So I started reading the intro and the first chapter, and I was like, man, these stories are so interesting. And of course, then I went up and read the whole thing. So I just want to say, the way I would describe it is it's a delightful read, and honestly somewhat surprised to have someone who's like a first-time author, but the way you shared your stories, I mean, the Baker story we talked about, the riding across the country, other things, I was like, this is like good storytelling. And then of course you talk a lot about the backpacking ultralight, and so it was just, as someone who doesn't do these things very often, it was an enjoyable read to me. So I just want to say, it's well done.
Well, I'm glad, and I did have a collaborator on it. Someone to put it together, because I thought, if I'm going to do this, it's probably only going to be once, and I want to do the best job I can, even though I'm donating all the proceeds to the PCTA. I want it to be something I can be proud of, and so, I had a collaborator help me kind of, work things into some kind of cohesive story, so it's not just me sitting down and
kind of go for it. I'm curious too. I know John was a big force in writing this book. Now that you wrote it, published it, what is the hope that you have for this book for people who read it?
Well, the hope is, I'm glad you enjoyed the book and the stories. I think you'll probably agree there's nothing like earth-shattering in there in my approach to life. I mean, it's probably you're nodding going, yeah, well, that makes sense. And but everyone hears things in different ways. And at times in their life when they're kind of receptive and ready to hear something. So it's my hope that the stories that are in the book and the words I've chosen and the timing for some of the readers will come together, and they'll pick up a thing or two that'll, help them have a life filled with more joy and meaning and purpose.
Yeah, that's really good. And of course, talk about hiking, backpacking. You're still continuing to do it. What would you say is like your favorite thing about going on all these journeys that you continue to do?
Favorite thing, I love like the excitement of putting together a gear list. Like, which sleeping bag do I need? Can I get away with my lighter one? Or, trying out one or two pieces of new gear or something like that. Planning the trip, and then just that. And I still get like kind of like butterflies a little bit setting out. It's like, did I remember everything? It's like, what are conditions going to be like compared to what I planned for? So I enjoy the challenge, and I enjoy that being out there, just walking all day, every day, because I don't do a good enough job when I'm not outside about exercise. So it's it's great to push your body that hard and watch it get stronger.
What is of all the places that you've hiked, backpacked, what has been your favorite, like scenery wise and outside? Like, what was your favorite place you ever hiked?
In general, I just like to be outside, but it's really hard to beat. I did a trip to Emigrant Wilderness in the Sierras, just kind of north of Yosemite area, for a group of friends of a friend from Maine mostly. And, watching them in the Sierras just like kind of reminded me like there's a lot of nice places, but the Sierras definitely like special.
Yeah.
Unique.
Yeah. Speaking of, is there any at this point like bucket list places you want to hike or see?
Well, we've actually got it. I've got to talk to my wife. I've got a list of like potential 2025 trips. And there's more than we can do. And there's some that we're going to do together.
Okay.
And there's some that I would do by myself because they involve like sleeping in the dirt and walking all day. And so I need to sit down with her and kind of figure out like which ones we know we're going to do now, and which ones are now probably not going to happen, and which ones are maybes, one of those is New Zealand. We'd like to, I may have an opportunity to go out there and speak. And we think it'd be fun to rent a camper over there and spend a couple of weeks bumming around New Zealand. We've never been. Yeah. So yeah, we love Italy, Europe. We love Japan. Just got back from our third trip there.
Wow.
And
this is, did you say the bike trip was going to be 25 or 26?
26, the big bike trip. Yeah.
And do you think that this bike trip will end with all four of you together, unlike the first go round?
I think so. Yeah, I think we're all older and wiser and smarter and a little more chill, hopefully. I know I am. So
yeah. And maybe it'll go a little bit slower. Not as many miles a day.
Yeah, I think we'll be going slower for sure. Yeah,
that's right. That's more. Well, Glenn, I just appreciate your time, your stories, just the character you have, how you care for people well. You really kind of get that in the book as well. For people who maybe want to learn more about you, the book, and even like where they can get, Gossamer gear. I know there's a lot of stuff there, but like where can people go online to get the book and connect with the kind of your company and all that sort of thing?
Probably the easiest is glenvanpeski.com. I've got information on the book there. I've got blog posts. You got gear lists. They can see press, links to podcasts and stuff like that. And then gossamergear.com for the gear. Yeah. And if you do show notes, I can get you those links to the people, who cater to beginning backpackers, people that want to check it out and kind of learn from ground zero.
Cool. Yeah, and we'll definitely put all that stuff in the show notes. Glenn, thanks so much for your time and you sharing your life and your story. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it.